Well, yeah, when you...
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm here with Louis Colburn, who's come to Iowa City from Philadelphia to install his show after the architect is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked, what was the first piece that's a part of this exhibition that you started working on?
Right.
What started the thought process for all of these?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, what started the thought process for all of these is probably different from the first piece, but this one here, which is the, I call it entitled study model, is probably the first thing that I started working on. And the whole premise, I guess, for the show is it's kind of a shift in my work, but it's more towards it's dealing with the fact that I just bought this old sort of decrepit house in the part of Philadelphia where my studio is, and realizing that more and more that's sort of come to occupy my mind in a way. And so this starts very sort of directly from that, in the sense that it is, if not exactly a scale model, then at least a model of the house in some greater state of disarray than it presently exists in. But so starting to play with the house and the space, and then also how we think about and experience and represent those things. The other thing that I sort of think about with this particular piece is that it's kind of almost like a theory versus practice thing in my mind, because it's the sort of, the house is this like the humble beat up thing that is sort of almost falling apart, and then this sort of landscape element, if I can call it that, it's generated by this sort of, I guess, advanced like modeling software and digitally fabricated and milled and all this other stuff. So it's like this sort of ideal and practical shape that some architect might dream up now, versus the reality of what's falling apart in Kensington.
If this top model is in some way a representation of what you live with on a daily basis, and some of the material literally coming from that spot,
right.
How do you think both the material that this other model is made out of, as well as the process that generated the model, how do those relate to what you deal with on a daily basis?
I think that I'm sort of trying to like abstract from what would be what I'm encountering on a daily basis there, because this is, it's foam, it's the insulation material that you would get at Lowe's, and certainly I've used it in work before, and also in practice working on the house. But the thing about it is that it's kind of a temporary material, and it's also, I think it's kind of like, I don't know, maybe this is a little bit high-minded, but it's kind of like the plastic sculpture material now, and plastic in the sense of like it's the thing that you're sort of it's a dense material that can be carved, like it's a subtractive process, as opposed to, but it's cheap and it's temporary. It's not like stone, and not that I ever have worked in that, but so it's sort of like a default sculpture material, I think, now, and it's also it's a model making material because it's temporary. It's soft and it's fragile and all that other stuff. So it works as a model, it works as like a sketch model or an idea, As much as the process seems complex, when you get into it, the iterations happen really rapidly.
Mm-hmm. So. Are you saying that like this subtractive model or this subtractive way of working, are you trying to tie that into the idea of a newer way of building things at all, or is that too much of a jump to make?
Well, I guess the thing is, I think a lot about where I work, I'm exposed to a lot of these sort of new architectural sort of form-finding tools, and this is the result of one of those things, but it's something you just sort of like knock off to see what that would look like, and then you go on and knock off another one. At least that's the sort of ideal process that I encounter. I'm not thinking about it in terms of like a new way to build things, I guess.
Yeah, and maybe not a new way to build things, but just thinking about like the idea of like kind of a larger scale. I'm getting kind of pretty far out there actually right off the bat, like thinking about like society as a thing, like we need these new, like what is the subtractive way to make, instead of like think of houses built brick by brick, but you have like a top down model, like we have this new development, this is the model for doing it, here's the I guess that's what
that's it's interesting, because like I think discussions like that happen pretty quickly from whenever people start playing with these new tools and new ways of making objects. I think my primary engagement with them is at the model making level, as opposed to, the sort of really high-minded, I'm going to, come up with a new way to make a building. 'Cause, I'm not an architect, I'm an artist. I love architecture, I love thinking about that. It's a lifelong interest, but it's not something I'm going to go do and sort of, and there's something kind of, I think that the other thing that, to go back to that sort of theory versus practice thing, it is sort of, like, this stuff is really sort of utopian in a way. It's like, we're going to come up with this new way to do this thing, and it's going to look incredibly beautiful and like nothing you've ever seen before, and it's going to be incredibly efficient to make, and it remains this thing that only exists as like a board or like, an image that someone's rendered, So that's, I think that's kind of a core thing in a lot of my work, is this idea of, this, like, the ideal world, this ideal idea versus what we actually have to deal with, and that's kind of what the show title comes from too, like, after the architect is gone, it's sort of, I think it's kind of sad in a way, but it's also beautiful because it's after this sort of grand scheme has been executed, we're left to sort of put the pieces together ourselves and make it work somehow,
I think hearing you talk about both subtraction and addition, if we want to like oppose those two ideas as both means of constructing and ways of understanding things, relates to all of these pieces in the show.
Right, yeah.
To granted, maybe we want to look at this one behind us, which is literally has pieces again from your home, but also has another sort of constructed model,
right?
Which, in my mind, reads as both additive and subtractive.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's a funny thing that we're kind of going down that path.
Sure,
it's not something it's good because it's not something that I ever really think about or like worry about in terms of how the work is made. But it's an interesting. It's good to kind of to go back to it, because I mean, I guess I don't know how I even talk about this one in that sense, because it has that same sort of ideal versus practical thing going on, because you're looking at like this particular thing I really like, because this is a piece of paneling that came out of the house, and this was behind a radiator. And so because you can't get a paintbrush behind a radiator, they left it like it was, and then when you pull it out, it's almost like a painting, because it's got like 3 different layers of really kind of crappily applied paint in a way. And then, so that's, it's like, okay, on the ground we have to deal with these things. And then this bit is sort of, I mean, I was telling Eric the other day that I sort of in passing encountered this idea of like, the standing desk. That's this other sort of great idea that you're supposed to be able to work comfortably, ergonomically for long periods of time. But then I also, again, this comes out of the language of architectural model making, because it's like the stacked topographic landscape model is this common form that I end up encountering a lot. And then, but generating it and kind of taking it back on itself, because it's really only generated, again, in the software, it's only generated by the relative position of those 4 coffee cups. So when I had this thing running, I could move the coffee cups around in virtual 3D space, and they would generate a different landscape every time they were moved. And then this, of course, is the manifestation that I sort of liked, and then moved to the process of actually creating. But it's sort of, it is a little bit, it's deliberately absurd in that sense, because rather than, they're thinking, okay, if we grade this landscape slightly and the drainage and all these other things, and it's not even a landscape, it's just this thing defined by the relative position of 4 coffee cups in space. But
this is like, I'm just saying this as someone who just came down and experienced this exhibition for the first time several hours ago.
Right.
This is my favorite of the pieces. So it's so like, to me, this is I don't know if I can quite get the words right, but it's really like, it's got a tad bit of psychogeography to it. It's got a tad bit of like this like hallucinatory workspace to it, where like, I don't know, just like the coffee cups don't seem like, I keep looking at them thinking it's one coffee cup that has in my mind like become 4 after like being at this like set space for a while, and
right. I think it also, to me, like, it exists as so much more than just this landscape. I'm getting like it operates both as like a very like zoomed out picture and a very zoomed in picture, like considering the entire piece specifically with this table leg,
right.
And that it starts to operate as a desk, but this doesn't read either as a real workspace or as a space where you could come in and like casually encounter it in your home.
Right. Yeah, no, I think
which I think is, that's a great part about the piece. I think like it's made so much more complicated by the fact that you have these objects that are gesturing towards a workspace, or particularly an architectural type of workspace.
Yeah, I think actually I hadn't actually sort of seen the whole thing fully set up before I saw it here, but I think really that the little like this thing is it's too little in a way, which is even better, and the whole thing is maybe like 3 inches taller than it ought to be. But that, again, I kind of like that even more than I maybe would if it were something I really felt like you could really engage with in that sense. The other wonderful little details. This is where the smoke detector was installed in the room, and no one ever managed to like take it off to repaint the room, so it remains this little sort of sad patch of paint. And it's also that the back to the house. These are the sort of like artificial building materials that you use to cover up the original building materials, which have decayed too far if you're not willing to go that extra route of removing the original things. So it's like this kind of funny veneer effect.
Yeah, that's. I'm not going to speak about that one anymore. I'm gonna let that one sit for a little while before I keep going on.
So I guess
Can you tell us a little bit about
Explain every one of your pieces in this show.
Well, no, it's good. I mean, I'm just glad to be able to talk about it a little bit.
Yes.
So this one started with a really simple kind of point of departure of wanting to rebuild. I'm gonna botch the pronunciation, but Jarrett rebuilds red blue chair using materials removed from the house that I'm working on right now. Thinking that was sort of almost enough in and of itself, and so all of this, these parts are sort of milled to the right sizes from studs and things that were thrown out of the house, and I put the thing together, and it sort of it worked, but it was very brown and very sort of modest, and it wasn't there wasn't much going on at that point, and from there. I think this one sort of happened the most sort of loosely of all the pieces in the show, I guess. But from there was this vanity that we took out of the bathroom, and it was in our basement, and it was, I personally find this type of stuff really kind of ugly to have to live with, the sort of laminate coating on particle board, so it's just like fake and unpleasant. And so I trundled the thing over to the studio, sort of sink and all. And then, to my joy, discovered that I could cut the sink in half, and found out how to do that. And sort of wanted to plant this reconfigured and cut up vanity on top of the chair, and also sort of plumb it into it in a way. And then I think I'm just discovering how nice the sound component is. We were talking about that, because it's both sort of soothing, like a water feature here, but then in my mind it's the sort of like nightmare of the water leak that you cannot locate, this thing in the walls. So that's sort of, I guess, where that came from, in some sense. But I also just like it as an act of sort of reconfiguring that vanity into something that still like points toward what it was, but is formally very different and totally not functional.
I mean, it feels to me very much like the two components, are sort of inseparable in the way I've come to understand the chair. When you first told me about it, I was excited, even just with the reconstruction of the chair, using the materials from your home. But they seem so much of a piece now.
Yeah. No.
And they're so well integrated and speak to one another so well. Yeah.
Well, because the thing is, the reason that I wanted to work with that chair is that a lot of the I guess new development in our neighborhood is sort of, I think in my mind, almost like aping the language of modernist design. It's these sort of really flat buildings with bright colors and things like that. Yeah. And this chair is a sort of really well thought out example of sort of Dutch modernist furniture design. And So sort of making it out of humble materials was sort of one gesture in that way. But then again, it's, adding all these other complications to it, all the things like plumbing, no one wants to, it's not romantic, no one wants to deal with plumbing, just sort of like almost bringing that like down to ground a little bit in some sense.
I really like the fact that this chair has, your version of the chair has kind of turned the original one on its head in that it was designed to be able to be reproducible, mass reproducible, and you have used these materials that are discarded or no longer useful for something else, and made something that is totally unlike any of the chairs that would have been produced otherwise. So.
That's a good way of thinking about it.
And you can't even sit in this one.
I think it actually takes some doing to I think coming to it initially, I don't know that you would I guess you do see the chair, but it's pretty kind of camouflaged at this point,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Just checking the title.
No.
The door, the such a nice touch, I think.
I'm really glad how the bend kind of worked out, because it's sort of really, it's kind of equivalent. These were going to try to fit together more tightly, but then I realized that I sort of just wanted more space for the thing to exist. I also really like that the water, there's just enough of a sink for this much water, but no more.
Yeah.
And also that this was obviously installed, just to sort of spruce up the property in the most cosmetic way, and then they didn't even bother to take the label off the thing. Here's this one. So this is called this Untitled 1,000 Miles, and this one, I guess, it has kind of a complex story, because I was thinking about a different installation for this space for some time, and then after I saw, the thing about it is this gallery in its floor plan is almost identical in dimension to the living room of our house, so 28 and a half, 20 foot 6 inches by 12 feet or something like that, and so I kind of wanted to connect those two spaces, and I had this other installation in mind, and then after seeing images of the space, I thought, that may not kind of function the way that I intended it to. So this is a door that was taken out of the house, and we had around because we didn't want to get rid of it, but we didn't really ever want to use it again because it's kind of old and ratty, but it's also old and nice in a way. So from there, I sort of built this structure first in our living room, which is we're working on, I guess, at this point. It's like half a step further along than it is in the photograph. And then photographed it there and took it.
And this is the room that's about equal in dimension to this room that we're in. Yeah.
And so then this is the photograph of the Philadelphia sort of iteration of this object. And the part that's made its way out here to PS1 is just the door, and everything else has been recreated. But it's the sort of sci-fi part of my brain, which always operates a little bit when I'm making art, is sort of fantasizing about opening that door and ending up in my living room and going the other way and back and forth, But so that was kind of how that occurred, I guess.
I had to answer questions about what this was with the theater people who are next door. What did they say? Screwing into our set right now. She said, "What is this about?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's a really loaded question for as you're going to the bathroom, and I tried to explain it in my simple way. But she was like, "Oh, I thought it was like a door to heaven, but it's ironic because it's going down."
That's good. Actually, I can't really explain this I don't really know that. I do have another anecdote about it, which is really good. While I was working on it, there were actually contractors working on our house. They were, reporting in front of the building. And so I was in the living room building this object, and they were running around doing other stuff. And I came back at one point, and Butch, the lead guy, said, he saw me put it together, and I kind of explained to him that it's an object for a show that I've got coming up in Iowa, and apparently one of his guys asked him what it was, and Butch said, "Oh no, he just wants to have the door to his basement in the middle of the living room, so we're just putting that there."
Yeah.
I think the guy took the bait for a little bit of time too, which is kind of good. But
yeah, it's got that like. You do kind of want to try and use it in some, knowing how awkward that would be.
Right.
But, yeah.
I also like that, I had seen the image before you came, and I like the fact that now, when I look at it, it like also strikes me as a half door, since the door was literally cut in two to make it easier to get here, which makes it seem like something that you're just going to hang out of.
yeah. Just the
like
top
you're
half
gonna
opens.
feed a horse over it or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Well, it's also that it's the smallest door in our house.
Really
I think it's
narrow.
like 24 inches. It's really
Yeah, that
tiny.
is, yeah.
I don't know what their rationale was in building that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that, I guess the clearest thread between this and work I've done before is that I really like having an object and then an image that relates to it, because it gives the object so much more of a history, and it almost engages the viewer in, I hope, this dialogue between, what happened here. I can put together a narrative of some form between this object and the photograph, and realizing that it's not simply an object that is, built to be looked at once something's been done with it. It's almost like a performative history of the object in a way too. So.
How do you think people will relate to it in terms of seeing the photograph and then the object here without knowing the history of the fact that the only part that has come here from the image is the door, not the rest of the piece?
That's complex. I mean, I don't know that, and people won't know that,
Sure.
obviously. I'm okay with that. I mean, I think that I like having that ambiguity, I guess, is what I should say, because the materials are sort of generic enough that I was able to get them again here and remake it. But if people are, no one really knows where that is anyway.
Sure.
It's just sort of a generic space, so it could be down the street from here, I guess. But,
Well, I feel like it also plays with that again in the recognizable part of the piece, the part that is literally what you see and will latch onto is the door sitting on top of this other very rectangular piece, so that the other pieces in the show are all sitting on the crates that they were shipped in, which very much read as shipping crates,
Right.
which is great. And I think this is speaking the same language, but is operating in a very different way.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like a pedestal for it. 'Cause I never even thought of it like as being a low pedestal, because I think the sort of function of that thing, the lower plinth, is in my mind to sort of have light underneath the door and give it that sort of sci-fi glow thing that you might associate with something that might move you from one point to another more rapidly than you're accustomed to. Maybe I'm putting too much weight on the back, but it seems like it also has this sort of greenhouse connotation in my mind, which is kind of nice.
This isn't a typical greenhouse material.
I think you could use it for greenhouses. I mean, I'm not sure. I don't know how well it actually works, but I'm sure people have.
What is the material called?
It's called coroplast. It's essentially, it's like corrugated cardboard made out of plastic. They use a lot for signs, like the rigid lawn signs that you see into that.
Well, this is great. I think we should end and give us a little break before the opening. But
Thank you. It's
both for coming, Lewis, and for doing this interview. And we're both really looking forward to this work.
Good.
It's great.
Good. Well,
Perfect.
thank you. I mean, it's a real pleasure to actually talk about my work with someone. It's not like it doesn't happen ever, but it's nice to, it's nice to hear different words about it. So.
no, it's good, and it's good to kind of be that bridge for people who will come down and see the show and be interested, and then be able to kind of dig more into it. So, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yep.